So as we're going through the Mishnah of Moed Katan, pretty much just as we did in the Mishnah Beitza, as we go through this Mishnah, we're progressing from topic to topic in a kind of by chains of association. So we closed on the third Mishnah with questions about irrigating fields, drawing water from tree to tree, whether we can irrigate seeds that have basically not been planted, never been fertilized before the festival. And both of these halachot are taught in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And we're going to go on to other halachot related to work in the fields. And actually, I think Kahati suggests that this halacha is also taught in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, although it doesn't say so. But the Mishnah just continues. It just rolls on from the question of irrigating the fields to trapping animals which are going to destroy the fields. Tzadin eta ishut ve'eta achbarim mistei ha'ilan umistei halavan shelo kadarko b'moed uvashveit. We can trap moles, and ishut, I think, is a mole, but it's described in the commentators as some kind of animal with no eyes that seems to dig holes and make mess. So it seems to be a mole, or something like a mole anyway. And an akhbar is definitely a mouse. And we trap them in stei ilan, that's an orchard, basically. I've translated here as a tree field, but it's basically an orchard. Umi stei halavan, and in a grain field, but we don't do it in the usual way. Shelo kadarko. And we talked about the fact that there's a tension between the need to not do things on Chol HaMoed, but also the need to avoid financial loss. And one of the ways, which we're going to see very frequently, one of the ways in which the rabbis reconcile this tension is by saying, okay, we're going to do some work, but we're not going to do it in the usual way. We're going to do it in a non-standard way. So, and the usual way of setting a trap seems to have been to dig a hole and to put a trap in the field. So you can see, for example, if you're digging a hole in an arable field in the seventh year, well, this feels really like plowing. And if you're doing it in Chol HaMoed, this feels really like work. So we can understand why we would do that in a non-standard way. And the sages come back and say, we can do this in an orchard, in a tree field, in the usual way. There seems to be an assumption that perhaps the moles or the mice do more damage in the orchard than they do in the arable field. Or maybe the issue of making holes is different. Maybe making holes in a field, in an orchard, is different from making holes in an arable field, which really feels very, very, very close to plowing. And so they say, so the sages say, look, you can operate in an orchard in the usual way, but in an arable field, not in the usual way. And now we're going to change subject. We're going to change subject in the middle of the Mishnah, as we've said before. We can block up a breach. This is a breach in a wall or something. We can block up a breach in the wall during the festival. And in the seventh year, we build in the usual way. Well, look, we can sense that in the seventh year, interesting, by the way, that all of these Mishnayot are making parallels between the intermediate days of the festival and the seventh year. We'll need to figure out why that is. We can see that building something is not related to the seventh year because it's not plowing or improving the land, but it is work, of course. And the commentators are clear about the fact that if this was a breach in a wall of a house or a courtyard, clearly you'd stop it up during Chol HaMoed because you're anxious about monetary loss. Some robber might come through it. But if it's just a garden wall, the possibility of loss is is kind of less. And okay, so you don't build it properly, but you kind of block it up. And then we go on to Tzara'at. We're going on to leprosy, plague. Rabbi Meir Omer ro'in et hanagaim batchila lahakel aval lo lahachmir. Rabbi Meir says, we're going to have two different halachot from Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says we inspect plague spots. This is a priest who's inspecting plague spots. If someone discovers plague, then the priest has to come out immediately, and he may, by the way, declare it immediately not plague. So he can make a ruling immediately that this is not plague, but he might also make a ruling that this person has to be closed off for 7 days. So Rabbi Meir says the priest can look at plague spots at the beginning, in other words, at the beginning of the plague, lahakel, to be lenient. He can release someone from the plague, because this is it's a happy thing to do on Chol HaMoed. You want to release someone from being shut up, but you can't actually go the other way. But Chachamim Omrim, and the sages disagree. Lo lahakel v'lo lahachmir. If you're going to make a judgment, it might go either way. So they rule that we don't inspect these plague spots on Chol HaMoed, because you might have to shut him up. And now Rabbi Meir is going to go on we're going to associate Rabbi Meir with halachot about mourning, and we'll see again that issues of mourning run right the way through every single chapter of this tractate. So, I mean, and in general, by the way, the law in the Gemara, in the Talmud, all of the laws of mourning are taught in Moed Katan, but we'll see that this theme of mourning seems to run right the way through. And I'm not, like the parallel with the seventh year, it's not quite clear to me why this should be so, but perhaps we'll understand more by the end of the tractate why it is so. Anyway, Rabbi Meir says, he goes on to say, he also said, Rabbi Meir said a man can gather his father's and mother's bones because this is a joy for him. And apparently in the time of the Mishnah, when you died, they would put you in a sort of a temporary grave, and they wait until your flesh had kind of completely wasted away and decayed. And then they would take your bones and rebury your bones in a proper family mausoleum. So in other words, burying the body and letting it decay was separate from the final burial of the bones. So Rabbi Meir is talking about this final burial. He'll say, look, you can come and you can get your father and your mother's bones, because it's a great joy for him. Rabbi Yossi is going to disagree. Rabbi Yossi Omer Evel Hulo. Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's a mourning for him. You can't do that. And actually, we don't mourn on Chol HaMoed. Lo yorer Adam al meto ve'lo yaspideno kodem l'regel shloshim yom. Actually, we don't stir up wailing. In the time of the Mishnah, again, they would have been hiring professional wailers, or for that matter, professional eulogizers. We're not going to do that. Lo yorer Adam al meto. We're not going to stir up wailing for one's dead, nor make a eulogy for him. Kodem l'regel shloshim yom. And Gemara says, actually, we're not going to do it for 30 days before the festival. The Gemara observes that the memory of somebody who's passed away actually sticks in your heart for 30 days. So even up to 30 days before the festival, you moderate your mourning, because you don't want that feeling in your heart to be extended right through the festival. And then along the same lines, Ein chofrin kokin ukvarot b'moed. We don't dig burial niches and tombs during the festival. these burial niches seem to be niches. These are holes cut out of caves, so that the cave itself will be prepared, and they will cut out holes in the caves to put the bodies in. Ukvarot bamoed, and tombs. The Rambam suggests that the tombs are actually built above ground. So a kukin is a sort of a place in a cave that's below ground, and a kever, in the language of the Mishnah, is a tomb which is above ground. And the Rambam says we don't actually build a tomb above the ground on Chol Moed. I think the assumption of the Rambam is, it takes a long time to build a tomb above ground. It's clearly for someone to be buried in after the festival. So ein chofrim kukin ukvarot b'moed. We're not going to prepare burial niches or tombs during the festival. Aval, but mechanchenet kukin b'moed. But we can sort of adapt or inaugurate burial niches during the festival. And the Bartanura says, look, she'im hayaroch mekatzro. If it was too long, they'd shorten it. And if it had been too short, they kind of lengthen or widen it. So you've got these niches in the sides of the caves, which are ready for burial. But of course, and they might be half prepared, but of course, they don't know who's going to die. We have to bury people on the intermediate days because, well, it'd be terrible not to. But we don't know who's going to die. So we have to adapt their size slightly to fit whoever does die actually during the festival. And then we're going to explain v'osim nivrechet b'moed. We make a nivrechet is a sort of it's a hole. It might be a bathing pond, but the assumption here is it's actually a hole it's a grave to put a body in. We make a nivrechet on the moed, for intermediate days. Ve'aronim hameit bechatzer. And if we've got a dead person in the courtyard, we're actually going to make a coffin. So again, we wouldn't want to make a coffin without a dead person being there on Chol HaMoed, because it looks like work. It looks like we're a professional coffin maker. But if there's a dead body there, we can certainly make the coffin. Although Rabbi Yehuda will say, Rabbi Yehuda will forbid, Ela im ken yeshimor nasarim. Rabbi Yehuda will forbid unless there are actually sawn boards at hand waiting. In other words, unless we've already done the sawing in advance before Chol HaMoed.